Yeah, so Brandon, thanks so much for having me on this podcast. Truly an honor to be here. Yeah, looking forward to sharing Founders Beta story.
So what is Founders Beta? How did it start? Kind of what was the idea behind it? Because it's quite a unique idea, kind of building community. Entrepreneurship tends to be quite a lonely thing uh, for many. So how did the idea come to be and kind of the business formed?
Absolutely. So, Founders Beta actually started as a side project, right? So it wasn't really
Mhm,
meant to be a company or anything like that, or even a community for that matter. It was just initially I was trying to work on my first startup, right? And I realized that founders go like you go through many struggles, right?
mhm,
As a founder, I was trying to find a co-founder, build the product, get customers, right? Get some PR as well, and I was like, where's the support for founders, right? I'm sure there
mhm,
are other people that are, building startups at the time, right? And I talked to one of my friends who was also doing at a startup at the time,
mhm,
surprisingly. And I was like, why don't we start a little group for founders to kind of share expertise and knowledge, right?
mhm.
Because as you know, a lot of times, startup gets you get a lot of advice out there, right? But if you haven't been a first employee at a startup or early stage, right? If you haven't been a founder, it's really hard to relate, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, it started that, and initially it was just a group. I started writing, and then eventually we saw the traction, like the
Mhm.
traffic on the website, and I was like, hey, this could be actually something, right? So I ended up focusing on that. And so today it's a big online community for founders, people in tech wanting to build a startup, scale. So we help them with number of things, team building, getting their stories out, and have them involved with the community. So really help startup scale basically.
Like you were saying, it's such a common story. New founders trying to find a community is very challenging, and
Right.
especially due to the fact that, like you said, if you haven't been a part of an early stage startup or haven't been a founder yourself, you don't really know the struggles. Just because, unlike a normal job where, hey, these are your tasks, this is the job requirements, you're wearing so many different hats as a founder. You don't know if you should get a lawyer, if you should do the patent. Like the world's literally your oyster, and there's so many different options. So
Right.
having a community to bounce ideas off of is always so valuable, especially early on and while you continue to grow.
Absolutely.
Did you find initially, like within the community, did you find that there were certain industries that were more lacking community initially or more interest in this? Or was it that everyone who was a founder kind of found value connecting together?
Right. Well, I think pretty much what we found out early on was anybody that is building a business, like the struggles are very common, right?
Hmm.
Even though there might be different industry, like somebody could be building a hardware startup, right?
Hmm.
Versus a software, but like the struggles of finding a co-founder is the same, right? So, or just getting that support, right? At the end of the day, like there's a lot of commonalities between the industries, right? Like in
Hmm.
terms of even in terms of like marketing or getting customers, right? Like some things like it is common, right? So what we found out is really it's potentially for anyone that wanting to build a business,
Hmm.
right? And a lot of struggles are the same, but of course, each industry has its own challenges, right? So it's very domain specific, but a lot of the times the commonality among founders building companies is the challenges are very similar in many ways. So if you like, let's say, come to Founders Beta, hey, you can meet a founder from a totally different industry, right? Have a conversation, and hey, that can give you some new ideas about how to solve the problem. What do they do
Hmm.
that is helping them that may apply to you, even though you're doing something completely different, right? But some principles are applied across all industries. You got to have a product, you got to find customers, right? You got to do marketing, and all of these things can't really be skipped, right? So it's really good to bring founders together from different industry to really help them stay motivated as well. And I think that's also one of the things that it's really hard to be on your own, and most of the times we don't have the network, right? Like
Hmm.
Most people, their networks are people working at another job, right? And it's hard to find those people that are out there trying to make it happen and trying to build a startup, or whether it's a side project or whether they're full time at it. I mean, the challenges are very similar.
And obviously, you said this start as a side project, kind of like a side business, or almost an idea, like you said, in the early on. At what point did you realize, hey, this could be a real business here? There actually could be a revenue generation. This might, this is not a blog. This is actually a company we can start to form. Was that a certain view count or certain amount of visits, or kind of what was that tipping point from, hey, this is something I do for fun versus, hey, this is a real business I'm going to spend my focus and spend my time on?
Right, right. So I would say, like, if you're thinking about building a startup, right? Like, always
Mhm,
think about doing it on the side first, just
mhm,
so you can get traction and kind of get a feel about what the market needs and what it doesn't need, right? And I think that's really a good way to go about it, because a lot of times, sometimes I see people jump at an idea and then you go at it, but hey, you got to prove the traction, right? And yeah, and even for founders beta, like,
mhm,
like, it was more like that we got the traction, right? So like we saw a growing website traffic, right? And then eventually at some point every startup has to monetize, right?
mhm,
And if you can't monetize, really there is no business, right? and
mhm,
and I think we got lucky because our site traffic grow and grow, and there were more founders wanting to be, joining the community. And then that's when we got really lucky, because we're like, okay, we got this great community, but how do we make it sustainable, right? And
mhm,
so today it's like a membership community, right?
mhm,
So it's for founders, by founders. So like, so that's how we sort of figured it out, and we were able to, continue the momentum, because if content creation on the internet is really tough, right? So,
mhm,
and especially for community building, you have to find a way to so make it sustainable. And there are lots of models out there, but I think definitely building a membership community is definitely a good way to go about it. But you have to prove your value, right? So people aren't just going to come and be like, yeah, so you have to prove the value. You have to have an engaged community. So, but I think, going back to your question in terms of
mhm,
when to jump at it, I think when you have good enough of a data, you can tell, hey, this could be something. And also when you have an actual, paying user, right? That could be also another thing to do as well, where you get more convinced, okay, somebody's gonna, be willing to actually pay for this kind of service or a
mhm,
product, doesn't matter, or a community, right?
mhm,
But I think that sometimes startups, sometimes, we all get ahead of ourselves. We think there's so much demand, but you have to go out there. You have to put a price tag on your product
mhm,
or service, and see if the market buys, right? If they do, great. It could be something, right? Like, again, you
mhm,
have to look at other data, other key things that you're tracking, and then if people are willing to pay for it, hey, maybe take it a little bit more seriously, right? So, but if you put it out there, hey, nobody's buying anything, why not go back to the drawing board and kind of reiterate the model, or reiterate the idea? Maybe the idea isn't, there isn't a whole much demand out there. So
mhm,
I would say it really boils down to that traction, and traction comes in different forms. It could be a website traffic, it could be a newsletter, like email subscriber. But the best form of
mhm,
traction, of course, would be paying customers, and I think they are the only ones who can keep you in business, right? So
yeah.
so I think that's really the key, because I think sometimes, many startups, they get ahead and they think about fundraising, but then I'm like, okay, is there actual, like, do you potentially may have a
Mhm,
monetization channel, or do you have a paying user? And then, hey, if they do, that's a great sign. But if they don't, I would highly recommend going back to the drawing board and figure out, hey, who is going to actually, take out their wallets and pay for this kind of service, right? Because people, when you build at a startup, people, especially, your close network, they love the idea, they want
mhm,
to support, right? But can somebody actually take out their wallet and pay for that? That's a whole different conversation, right? So I would say in terms of monetization, definitely founders need to think about it. And oftentimes they monetize kind
Mhm,
of late, to be honest. So they have to think about
mhm.
it really early on and say, okay, is there a need for this? Will Are we going to have paying users or not, right?
Think you really hit the nail on the head there. So many times people are scared to make the jump from, hey, I have a lot of buy-in, a lot of people are interested. And you ask them, hey, are they paying? Are they, did they give you a
Exactly.
check? Did they pre-order anything? And they're like, no, no, no. But they said they're gonna give me the money. I trust them. And we all know if you ever work with a startup, that's never the case. Until they give you the
Exactly.
cash, words are useless. I like when people always
Exactly.
say that because it's true. Like you said, your family, your friends will say, yeah, no, for sure, I'll give you some money. I will buy
That's
this. And
right.
then you hand over and you say, hey, give me $100 for the product or membership fee. And they're, well, maybe next month. So then, like you said, being able to have a paying customer really proves that you have that product market fit. And I think that's the first step. That's very scary because
Right.
a lot more rejection when you need money, but
Right.
also, like you said, you have to make money to survive as a business. You can't be running it for free.
Exactly, exactly.
Hmm.
I think founders, I've been there too. We aren't running a charity, right? So
Hmm.
even charities need some form of, monetization, whether it's a sponsor. So
Hmm.
there's some money coming in, right? But I 100% agree with you on that in terms of founders figuring out a way to really, monetize and find a way to make it sustainable. Because if it's not
Hmm.
sustainable, then hey, it's not a business. I think it's better to
Hmm.
focus on making it sustainable, early on, and that is a challenging thing to do because, sales is hard at startups, right? Like
Hmm.
you face a lot of rejection, like pretty much. My philosophy is most of the times you have to think rejection by default, right? Because
Yeah.
literally, you have no brand, you're trying something new, you're putting yourself out there. So it's really hard to build that kind of credibility, and that comes with time. But I think the sooner founders focus on that, the better, because then they build that credibility over time and authority,
Hmm.
right? And once you have that authority in your space, then hey, no one can take that away from you, right?
Mhm. Oh, for sure. Like you were saying, really being able to develop those early customers, get them paying. And also, I found one thing, especially when working with customers, if they do pay, their opinions start to matter a lot more. They
Right.
will start to bring up issues that, if it's free, they might not complain. They say, hey, there's some bugs here. Doesn't bother me. When they start paying, their attention is very much on the fact, am I getting the ROI? Am I bringing the value out of it? And I think that's one thing a lot of founders and startups fail to miss or don't realize it, or like you said, maybe realize it too late that paying customers have much more of an investment into the success of your business, but most importantly, into what their dollars are going towards,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
which is always stressful.
I think 100%, and I think founders that prioritize their paying customers, they're going to win, right?
Mhm,
And I think that's really the case because also the other thing is, when you pay for a product or service, right? Chances are you're serious about it, right? Like
mhm,
if I'm a free user, hey, if the service shuts down tomorrow, hey, maybe it won't really bother me, right? But like
mhm,
but if somebody is a paying user, right, they have more kind of commitment, right? They want to use the product, they want to see it better, right? Especially early
yeah,
customers that back you up, right? And I think those are the ones that you really have to find and do everything you can to keep them, right?
mhm,
Because like as you said, like their feedback is really essential to your business. And yeah, if there's no feedback coming in and all that stuff, then hey, there's no business, right? Maybe it's just
mhm.
a hobby.
And I mean, speaking of payment, so with Founders Bay, how you created 3 tiers of pricing.
Yes.
How do you come up with that? Because obviously, we're talking about pricing, kind of figuring out the best price and how to generate revenue. Did it always start that way? Did you have one tier then spread out with different features? How did that come to be? Because that's all in itself a different type of challenge.
100%, I agree with you on that. I think the pricing is really tricky for founders early on, right? And
Mhm,
I tell you something too, like we often like we kind of like don't want to monetize, right? We just want
Mhm.
to keep going. We just want to keep building, right? Because of course it's fun, right? I mean, who wants to go get
Mhm.
rejected on a daily basis, right? It's a lot easier to, sit down, write code, right? Like, you
Mhm.
can just look at a computer screen and talk to nobody, right? But I think a lot of times it's like you have to at some point test, right? And I
Yeah.
think when it comes to pricing, I think startups just have to test. And people ask me too, like, how did I come up with, like, what we have today? Honestly, like, it wasn't really planned, right? We really
Mhm.
had no business plan, but we were executing, right? We were trying to figure out,
Mhm.
okay, can we have this kind of model actually working if we put a price tag on our service, on our
Mhm.
product, right? And I think that's a really good way to do it. And early on, we didn't have all these plans we have today, right? So today is a, of course, it's a full blown community, right?
Mhm.
It's a scale up, right? Like, it has grown, and it's growing really well. So, but early on, no, we didn't have all that, right? But what we did do, that we got lucky, we tested out, right? So we
Mhm.
started having a price, right? Whatever that price might be for your product or service, you have to figure
Mhm.
out, what makes sense, for the business for you to sustain it. Can you cover your cost with that kind of price, right? How many customers do you need, right? And I think once you sort of throw it out there, then you kind of reiterate. You put a price
Mhm.
tag. Okay, if there's no demand for it, okay, okay, then let's go back and kind of figure it out. Is it our pricing or is it the whole idea, right? Like, that's something like founders have to try out. But when it comes to pricing, honestly, my analogy is throw a spaghetti at the wall. So,
Yeah.
um, really, like, you have to throw everything at it. Like, there's no certain, like, there's no right way to say, oh, like, this is like the way to go. Because I know there's a lot of textbook talk about pricing, but like,
Mhm.
honestly, for pricing for startups, it's really a crapshoot because you don't know what the market is willing to pay because it's a new idea,
Mhm.
it's a new service, it's a new product, right? So the best way is just to come up with a number. Hey, that makes sense for you to cover your costs, and
Mhm.
test it. The best way is just to test it out there, and there's lots of way you can test it, right? And once you test it, then you kind of go back and see, okay, hey, if somebody is willing to pay for it or not. And that's something that is kind of really exciting, but at the same time, eventually you have to face the truth, right?
Yeah.
Because someone, either they're gonna pay for that price or they not, right? Or sometimes you get that feedback too from some users, right? And that's also, I seen, very helpful, right? Because they come in
Mhm.
and they're like, yeah, I'm interested in your service. And if it's expensive, they're gonna tell you, right? Or if it's out of their budget, right, they're gonna tell you, be like,
Mhm.
hey, I can pay for this, but maybe this is my price range, right? And you take that feedback and you run with it, right? And you got to execute on that feedback too, as you get more data too, right? Not just one
Mhm.
customer, but I mean, it helps because you're like, oh, okay, the market is willing to pay for this service for 199. Okay, that's
Mhm.
great. We figured it out, right? And then, I think it's all about going back. It's all about testing and executing because I think, there was a lot of theories in startups, right? You think
Mhm.
about it all day. It's like, oh, we're gonna have this amount of customers, this and that, but you don't really know till you put it out
That is so true. You don't know until you test it. And when someone else on the podcast, I was asking the same thing, like, how do you come up with this?
there,
And
right?
similar advice to you, you said you have to test it. You're a small company. You don't have the, like, you go to a big, like a Microsoft. They have trillions of data points to say what's the optimal price.
Right.
You're a brand new company. Nobody knows. Nobody knows if it should be $10, $15. You have to just test it and see what happens. And I think a lot of times, you were touching on a little bit, like the analysis paralysis. You can analyze all this. You can read all the
Right.
textbooks to say, this is the perfect. This is where supply meets demand.
Right.
But in the real world, it can take you a week. Try a price. It doesn't work. You've learned so much more than spending months trying to make the perfect model. And especially, I think one of the challenging things with a lot of startups or a lot of new companies is you're in an industry that's new or you're disrupting an industry.
Right.
So there is no reference points. You're not
Exactly.
most of the time
Exactly.
copying something else where you're like, well, $100, we're $199. It's always like
Right.
brand new things. And I think what you were touching on also is you can change your price as you go.
Right.
We've seen a lot of startups as you add features, you add different tiers, with data points. You're able to really expand and have a more holistic suite,
Right.
and kind of just have to run and test as you go because there's, like you said, it's such a dynamic world out there. No textbook can give you the right answer to anything.
Exactly, and you're absolutely 100% right, because sometimes you're a totally new industry. There's nobody to look at, or might be
Mhm,
limited data. So, and then the best way is just to pull out the numbers, and test it as much as possible. And once you start executing, your the path is going to be more clear, right? And I think that's has always been my philosophy with startups too, right?
mhm,
There's this famous Persian poet that says, "As you
mhm,
walk, the path will appear." Right? So
mhm,
it's really about executing, and then once you execute, your path is gonna become more clear, right? But if it's just an idea, if it's just like a theory, it just hey, it's not gonna go anywhere because you don't know the direction to which direction you
mhm,
should go. Which pricing model am I gonna go, right? So
mhm,
till you actually execute, and I think execution is really the key, because as you execute more, then the path will become more clear, whether it's
mhm.
pricing, whether it's marketing, or whether it's other things.
And obviously, on a similar point, as you're kind of building and growing your business, things start to become more clear. But one thing you can tend to see is as you start to have some success, especially maybe more on the tech side, there's infinite amount of features your customers want. They want, half your customers want A, half want C, half want you to change your site for these reasons, that reasons. How, now that Founders Beta is kind of, more established, you have
Mhm.
revenue coming in. How do you figure out what to spend your focus on? Because I'm assuming you have a lot of feedback, and that
Absolutely.
starting out, that's great to get feedback. And now you probably have so much feedback. So, how are you able to sift through what is like a need to have, what updates to spend your time on versus ones that, maybe are farther down the roadmap?
Absolutely. I think a lot of times when it comes to feedback, like you have to really get a good set of data, right? Like
Hmm.
if it's just if almost every user is telling you to have this feature or this kind of content, then hey, maybe you should listen more about it,
Hmm.
right? So I think it's good to have a good set of data in terms of, hey, where do we prioritize, right? In terms
Hmm.
of product development, or even in terms of content too, right? I mean,
Hmm.
sometimes people come check out your content, and they're going to tell you, hey, what kind of things they're interested in, right? And I think having a good sort of set of data points is really the key in terms
Hmm.
of prioritizing feedback. But also, I think talking to your users, almost, you got to have a good touch point with them on a frequent
Hmm.
basis, because if you don't have a good pulse on your community, on your product, on your service, hey, who's gonna who's gonna come up with a roadmap of launching the next thing, right? And I think startups are really moving, right? Like you have to be constantly moving at all times. So I think it's really the key for founders to kind of prioritize the data, but also actually talking to users, whether it's on a call, whether it's a coffee or whatever. My recommendation is, don't be shy, right? Like you gotta go out there and do it. And the other day I was talking to a founder, and he said about his customer. He said, if I don't talk with them on a weekly basis, I get nervous. So,
Hmm.
and you know what? He's right, because if you don't have a good touch point with what your users want, what your members or your customers want, then oh man, that's not going to be good in long term, right? So I would
Hmm.
say keep talking to users, keep collecting feedbacks, have somewhere where you store your feedback, right? To kind of figure out, okay, what are we getting at? Are people liking this? Are they not, right? And
Hmm.
they're going to tell you what they like and what they don't like. I think many users are going to do that. If not, hey, give them incentive to give feedback, right? So whether it's survey with a coffee or whatever, right? Something that gives them incentive to help you improve. And what I found too, if you're an early stage startup, a lot of people, especially your early customers, they want you to see, they want to have you to succeed, right? because they're already
Yeah.
paying for your product, right? So of course they're making a commitment. And I think for founders it's about kind of figuring that out. But I would say the key is always be talking to users no matter what. Yeah.
It and what you said right there is always be talking to users and continually talking to them. I know a lot of times, speaking with some founders, they realize, they'll have starting out, you're building your MVP, you're talking to a lot of customers, doing all those interviews, then you build it, and then sometimes you forget to continue talking to them.
Right.
So I think that's the one key, is building it into your process of how to get customer feedback, collect customer feedback, collect those data points, like you were saying, so that you're always iterating or adapting based on your customers' needs and what's changing in the market. And that's the one, I think that's the one challenging thing, is that if you are a successful company, you will start changing the industry itself. You'll start getting more
Exactly.
competitors. You'll start having people, maybe, initially you spent a lot of your time educating the market on your product and how it works. And then a few years in, everyone knows what it is. And now they're
Exactly.
asking for the futuristic features. So it's a never ending battle to constantly be
Right.
ahead of the curve, but not too far ahead. So you can always at least have your customers, or at least people in the market, understand what you are and kind of how you generate revenue.
Exactly, exactly right on that. And I think for startups too, you're in the fight to stay relevant, right? Like
Hmm.
really, like in terms of the market. So you really got to have a good pulse on your product and the market too. So you have to be constantly testing new things. And if one day you stop testing, I think that's the day where things are going to go south, right? Like so my advice is, at least run few experiments, every month, right? Like you got to test out new features, or whether it's even your marketing too, like
Hmm.
whatever that might be. I think always be testing, and I think that's really it's gonna help the startup to stay relevant. Otherwise, things move fast in the market, and the next thing you know, what you're building, nobody wants it, right? And after sinking all the resources. So I think that's a challenge to avoid. But the best way is just to test it and uh, and monetize and all that stuff that we talked about too. Because I think many
Hmm.
times people shy away from it because nobody wants to go, do the sales. But hey, eventually you have to do it, even if you're not comfortable. But that's the
Hmm.
whole point of entrepreneurship, right? Doing things that uh, are not comfortable, but hey, that's where you grow the most. Right? So
Yeah. And I think one thing I heard is that every founder has to be a salesperson. It's almost
100%.
impossible to start a business without having to, especially if you're trying to raise funding, have a sales pitch or a pitch deck, speaking with those early customers. It's a skill set that I feel, especially in the tech sector, is something that can be difficult to learn. But we see a lot of these big founders or big companies, it's a learning curve that they've almost all had to do. There's very few companies, unless it's a huge team, where the founder isn't able to speak about their product effectively, speak to their customers effectively, because unless you can hire it, you're the one who
Right.
has to explain everything. And I remember
Right.
early on, back when I was an undergrad,
Mhm.
when talking with, going working with incubators and stuff, one thing they used to or not force, but
Right.
recommend, and is a nice way of saying it, is that every founding member of the team or every employee of the company has to be able to explain what the company does in 60 seconds.
Right.
So if you ask the dev, he should be able to explain the same as if the CEO was. And I thought that was initially silly at first. Like, why does
Right.
everyone
Right.
have to know? But early on, everyone has to be a salesperson. Even if you're working
100%.
just on developing a tech stack, or
Right.
just a front end developer, they may require you to hop on a sales call or be that
Right.
person. So I think it's a, like you said, a very useful skill that is uncomfortable, but after a while you realize it's really just talking to people. At the
Exactly.
end of the day, it's
Exactly.
just talking to people. You're not forcing them to pay you.
Yeah.
You're really trying to help them solve a problem. And that's, I think, kind of in full circle, going back to, if you're solving a real problem, a lot of these challenges or issues become way less difficult.
Right. Right.
A great product is a lot easier to sell than a bad product. That's where all the stress and
Right.
trying to finagle them to get the money becomes a real issue. But if it's a great product, you're solving a real problem, people tend to see it pretty quickly.
100%. And I think it's all about founders getting comfortable with sales. And like you said,
Mhm.
if it looks overwhelming, just start having conversations. Take it one step at a time. So
Mhm.
and I think founder led sales cannot be skipped in a startup, right? Like you can't just go
Mhm.
hire somebody to do the sales for you because you don't even know what does this role like require, right?
Mhm.
So I highly recommend founders too, like early on, get comfortable with sales, figure out the process, how does it look like,
Mhm.
and hey, eventually when you grow more, sure, you can have somebody, as a sales rep, or have a dedicated team for
Mhm.
business development. But early on, founders led sales has to be there for startups to succeed. And if it's not there, then figure out a way to do it, right? Like, if you're just a coder, okay, maybe stay with that, but at least have a co-founder, or to be able to do the
Mhm.
sales. And but like you said, I think every person at a startup should be trained for that,
Mhm.
and really to have a thick skin too, right? Because
Mhm.
as founders, it's a challenge, right? Because a lot of times sales, 9 out of 10 is rejection, right? So,
Mhm.
and every time, whether you sell for fundraising, or whether you try to have a
Mhm.
customer buy in, right? Or try to recruit as well, right?
Recruiting,
Right,
yeah.
same thing. It's like, okay, you're out there, you have got to have a good conversation, right? And get comfortable with that too. But I think that's something that is something to be developed over time, because early on,
Mhm.
it can be discouraging. It's hard, right? Because 9 out of 10, it's like it's a no, right? But
Mhm.
all you need is that one yes, and I think that could be that one paying customer that can completely change the trajectory of your startup. And I think that's where a lot of startups can succeed, when
Mhm.
they find that balance between having the sales and working on that product. So yes,
I like how you touched on the fact that selling is also to your first employees, because I think that is one thing that
right,
is so difficult. Because I know, even working with a lot of early founding teams, and having many interviews where I'd be the first sales hire for
right,
one of the first BD hires on their team, it's people tend to forget that as a founder, you love your business.
right,
You think
right,
it's the greatest thing in the world. It's going to change the world. But then when you go to hire someone, the person you're hiring, they have to trust, first of all, that your business will be around in a few years.
exactly,
They have bills to pay.
right, right,
They also don't understand what your business does.
right,
Like, you're in an interview, they've looked on your website,
mhm,
but you have to convince them that, hey, you can grow your career here. We're pretty much taking a big portion of your life for the next few years, or your working
right,
day,
right,
to help me build my dream. So I think that is one thing that can be tricky, because it is, like you said, when you work for a startup, you're going to be hired for one thing but do 10 different things,
exactly,
especially as an early member.
exactly,
You're hiring for sales, but you might be doing support
right,
part of
right.
your
Oh,
time.
for
So
sure.
you better be sure, as a founder or a founding team, you can convince these reps that, hey, it's going to be rough maybe a year or two, or like, it's not going to be as simple. We're going to grow, we're going to change. Like you said, things adapt,
Right,
industries
right,
adapt, but selling that mission and vision is so important early on to get that employee buy-in, especially when sometimes salaries aren't as
right,
competitive
right,
because you don't
exactly,
have as much capital,
exactly,
and you want the top talent. So I found that is always a you think I found between like highly successful companies and maybe companies that
right,
are slower to scale, is that a lot of time those founders are able to sell not their product but their vision to the employees at a
right.
better level. And it's just like you said, it's just about talking to people at the end of the day. And
Exactly, exactly.
it's a interesting thing.
Oh, for sure. And honestly, no one else can do it. Like, the founder has to jump in and do it. And I think that's definitely a skill that can be learned, right? And I think that will definitely be one of the key things, key ingredients for a startup to
Mhm,
succeed and scale too. Because hey, you need sales, right?
mhm.
Without sales, there's no business for sure.
One thing with startups, and especially kind of early founding companies, is that it's very hard to separate work and life.
Right, right.
You have to spend a lot of hours, but if you spend, if you're working those crazy hours, you can also a lot of times get burnt out.
Mhm.
And as you know, a startup is not a one, typically, and very rarely is the one you get success in 1 year. It's a lot of
Right,
time spent
exactly.
kind of working towards long hours. How are you able to balance that,
Mhm.
work, but also having a way
Right,
of recharging? Have you found a formula that works well for you, and
right.
kind of how were you able to figure that out?
Right. I think almost, I would say, it's almost an experimentation, right? Like, you have to kind of try to find your balance. I think, these days it's more like a work-life blend, right? Like, it's
Hmm.
like your work and life is like almost blending, right? We're working remotely, there's like less physical space, right? Or whatnot. But I think a lot of it boils down to, how can you stay motivated long term, right? Like,
Mhm.
and I think there are a number of ways you can do that. I think one of the best ways is community, right? Because when you connect with other founders, what they're building, you get motivated, right? So you get that
Mhm.
accountability factor a little bit, right? And sometimes that's also missing in a startup, right? Because no one is holding you accountable, right? It's like,
Mhm.
hey, have you executed on that, roadmap? Have you talked to any users, right? So I think founders have to find a way to stay motivated long term. And I think
Mhm.
one of the best ways is talk to other founders, join communities, right? And my advice is don't build in isolation, right? And I think
Yeah.
that happens a lot of times where we see somebody has an idea, they just go build it. But hey, you need to be out there, you need to engage with communities, you need to engage with your customers, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's when you can, stay motivated. And I think that's really hard to do long term. So for me, it's all about, connecting with other founders, and yeah, having those conversations about, the struggles, and how they stay motivated too. And also the other thing I would say that really helps too is, do your favorite activities, make time for those, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's family, whether it's like, playing sports, always make time for that too. Because I think as founders we don't really prioritize our health as much, right? So,
Mhm.
but in order to survive long term, and it is a long term game you have to play,
Mhm.
you have to find a way that you can make it work. And I think doing those things really help you in terms of having a good balance in terms of tackling problems at a startup. And if you view it long term, I think that's where you can plan better, and definitely succeed. Because
Mhm.
it is in a short term. A lot of people come in, they think, you can build it overnight. It's a success
Yeah.
and it's $1 billion company. And then I wish it was like that, but a lot of times, it takes years, literally, right?
Mhm.
But I think once you figure out a lot of stuff with finding customers and all that, then I think that's a good point to be in. Uh, but
Mhm.
um, but by all means, have to find a way to survive long term, right?
Mhm. And like you said, building community is such an important thing because first helps with stress, helps with just having
Exactly.
knowing other people are going through similar things to you, and obviously that kind of ties back to really the importance of founders beta having an being able to be a part of a community where you have like-minded individuals going through the same struggles, but also give some advice to individuals who are like, hey, how did you deal with this problem? So you're not in the same problem by yourself. So, as we wrap up here, if people want to kind of learn more about Founders Beta, learn more about how they can participate, kind of be a part of it, what's the best place to get in touch and kind of get a part in touch with Founders Beta as well?
Absolutely. So yeah, the best way is come on foundersbeta.com, and we have lots of channels you can check out. We have a
Mhm.
weekly newsletter if you want to see what kind of companies are being built.
Mhm.
We have a great community on socials as well, so you can check
Mhm.
out our Twitter, our LinkedIn, and yeah, you're more than happy to connect with me anytime as well. And I share a lot of content in terms of upcoming companies,
Mhm.
and in terms of really helping every founder to grow and scale. And I think that is really exciting. But the best way would be our website for sure.